I want to start today by asking you to visualize a very specific corner of your house.
Mhm.
We all have one. Maybe it's a drawer or a shelf in the garage or, even just a hidden folder on your desktop that you haven't clicked on since maybe 2021.
Oh, yeah. The graveyard.
The graveyard, exactly. The place where good intentions just go to die.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the half-finished Duolingo streak where the owl is actively guilt-tripping you, or that dusty guitar you bought after watching one too many documentaries, or the coding boot camp login you haven't used in 6 months.
Huh. I feel personally attacked right off the bat. I have a watercolor set that is literally fossilizing in my desk drawer right now. I bought it. I painted one very, very sad-looking tree, and I put it away forever.
Right, and here is the thing. We usually look at that pile of stuff, that graveyard, and we feel one primary emotion, which is shame. We look at the unread books and the unused lace, and we tell ourselves, we say, I'm lazy, or I'm a quitter. Or the worst one, the one that really threatens our identity, I just don't have the talent for this.
Yeah, we treat it as a character flaw. We internalize it as a lack of grit or a lack of discipline. We think it says something fundamental about who we are.
But we are looking at a stack of research today, papers on neuroscience, cognitive psychology, social dynamics that suggest something very different. What if that urge to quit, that visceral physical repulsion you feel about 45 minutes into learning something new, what if that isn't a flaw at all?
What if it's actually a feature?
Exactly. What if your brain is literally designed to stop you from being a beginner? Today we are taking a deep dive into what we're calling the novice paradox.
And it is a fascinating intersection of biology and psychology. We've got papers here from John Sweller on cognitive load theory. We have neuroscientific studies on dopamine and error processing from researchers like Boline and O'Doherty. And we're mixing that with some cultural commentary from Ira Glass, plus social psychology on things like the spotlight effect.
And our mission for this deep dive is to explain why your brain, the actual wetware inside your skull, actively hates being a beginner. We really want to unpack why the beginner phase threatens your identity so deeply, why it triggers actual physical discomfort, and why we are so incredibly terrified that everyone is watching us fail.
It really is a defense of the beginner because the brain prefers familiar competence, right?
Yeah.
It craves efficiency. When you strip away that competence, the brain rebels. It wants to protect your ego and your energy.
So if you've ever felt like an imposter, or if you've ever felt just, well, stupid trying to learn a new piece of software, this deep dive is your defense attorney. We're going to prove that the pain of being a novice is biological, it's unavoidable, and if you know how to hack it, completely surmountable.
Yeah, let's get into it.
I want to start with the sensation itself, because the word hard doesn't quite cover it.
Yeah.
When I'm trying to learn something complex, let's say, I'm trying to learn to drive a manual transmission car, or I'm figuring out some new convoluted tax software, it doesn't just feel difficult, it feels physical.
Physical in what way? Like, describe the actual symptoms you get.
It's like my brain is overheating, I get irritable, I get sweaty, my vision feels like it narrows. I literally feel this urge to just escape the room. Why does a mental task trigger such a physical fight-or-flight response?
Because in a very real biological way, you are overheating. To understand this, we really have to look at the foundational work of John Sweller and Paul Chandler on cognitive load theory, or CLT.
CLT. This is basically the bedrock of how we understand learning today.
It is. And to grasp it, you have to look at the architecture of the mind. Sweller argues that human cognition is built around a very specific bottleneck. You have two main memory systems. First, you have long-term memory, or LTM.
The warehouse.
The warehouse, exactly. It is, for all intents and purposes, infinite. You have millions of facts, faces, song lyrics, childhood memories, and recipes stored there. It's vast, it's stable, it is essentially where you live. That's your identity. But then you have the workspace, working memory, or WM.
And let me guess, the workspace is not infinite.
It is comically small.
Yeah. How small are we talking? Like, what's the capacity?
So the research has evolved on this. Originally, Miller's law stated we could hold 7 ± 2 items, but more recent, stricter studies suggest it might be even smaller. Maybe 3 or 4 chunks of information at any given second.
4 items. That's it. I mean, that explains why if I'm dialing a phone number and someone just shouts a random number at me from across the room, I completely lose the thread.
Exactly. Your working memory is just a tiny sticky note. It's a scratch pad. It is extremely volatile. And this is where the novice paradox begins. It comes down to a concept in the research called element interactivity.
Element interactivity. That sounds dense. Break that down for us.
It's simpler than it sounds. Element interactivity is just how many different components of a task interact with each other simultaneously. Sweller and Chandler argue that difficulty isn't just about the volume of information you're taking in, it's about the simultaneity of processing it.
Can you give me a concrete example of that?
Yeah, okay, take learning a language. If I give you a list of nouns, apple, dog, car, and ask you to memorize the Spanish equivalents, that is a task with low element interactivity. Apple is manzana. You can learn that entirely in isolation. It takes up exactly one slot on your sticky note.
Right. I don't need to know the word for dog to understand the word for apple. They're totally independent.
Exactly. But now, imagine I ask you to have a live conversation in Spanish. Suddenly, you have to think about vocabulary, grammar, verb conjugation, tone, cultural context, and sentence structure, all at the exact same time.
And if you mess up the conjugation, the rest of the sentence doesn't make sense anymore. The elements are interacting.
They're crashing into each other. And for a novice, this creates an absolute flood. This is the crucial difference between you and an expert. It's not that the expert has a bigger brain or more raw talent. It's that the expert has schemas.
Schemas. This is a massive keyword in the literature. Unpack that for us.
A schema is basically a mental shortcut. It's a complex blueprint that you've already stored in that massive long-term memory warehouse. When a chess grandmaster looks at a board, they don't see 32 individual independent pieces.
They see the Sicilian defense.
Right. They see a pattern. That entire pattern, the position of every single pawn, knight, and bishop is chunked into one single file in their brain. So when they pull it into working memory, it only takes up one slot on their sticky note.
Wow. So they still have 3 slots left over to think about their grand strategy or what they're going to have for dinner later.
Precisely. But the novice, you and I, we don't have the schema yet. We don't have the zip file. So we look at that exact same board and we see 32 separate, highly volatile, independent variables.
And since we only have 4 slots in our working memory,
You are instantly breached. You are in cognitive failure before you have even made your first move. You are trying to hold 32 balls in the air with 2 hands.
this makes so much sense regarding that overheating feeling. I remember when I was first learning to edit audio for these deep dives, I would look at the timeline, the waveforms, the plugins, the volume meters. I felt completely paralyzed. It made me feel so incompetent.
And that paralysis, that threat to your self-image, is what Sweller calls intrinsic load. It's the inherent, unavoidable difficulty of the task itself. But here is where it gets really unfair for the beginner. Because you aren't just dealing with the task, you are almost always dealing with extraneous load too.
This is the bad stuff. This is the unforced errors of teaching, right?
Exactly. This is the stuff that does not need to be there. Poor instruction, a confusing interface, a teacher who talks way too fast or uses jargon. If you are already maxing out your 4 slots of working memory on the intrinsic task, and then I add a confusing diagram on a separate page.
Game over. Total system crash.
And the research shows this crash isn't just a metaphor. There was a study cited in our stack involving novice nurses in simulation training that perfectly illustrates the raw physicality of this overload.
Oh, this one was brutal to read. Break it down.
So researchers put these nursing students into a high-fidelity simulation with a patient mannequin, and they systematically manipulated the element interactivity. Basically, they controlled how sick the patient was and how many conflicting symptoms were presenting at once.
Ramping up the difficulty level.
Right. And they weren't just watching the nurse's performance, they were tracking physiological markers, specifically pupil dilation.
Why pupils?
Pupil dilation is a remarkably reliable biomarker for cognitive load. When your brain is working hard, your pupils dilate. It's almost a perfect one-to-one correlation. It's your body reallocating physiological resources to the brain to handle the strain.
So what happened to these students as the patient got sicker?
The novice's pupils blew up, they dilated significantly, their biological systems were screaming that capacity was reached, and then something really interesting happened. Their performance didn't just degrade linearly, it fell off a cliff.
They didn't just get a little slower, they started making objectively bad decisions.
They started satisficing. Satisficing. That's a portmanteau, right? Satisfy and suffice.
Yes, it was coined by Herbert Simon originally, but it's applied here to cognitive load. When the brain is drowning in data, it literally stops trying to find the optimal solution. It abandons the right answer. Instead, it grabs the very first solution that looks remotely plausible just to stop the pain.
It's a panic button. It's like your brain is saying, I don't know if this is the right button to press, but I need to press something right now so I can stop thinking about this and relieve the pressure.
Exactly. I'll just give the patient this pill so I can move on to the next crisis. It perfectly explains why beginners often make mistakes that look incredibly stupid in hindsight.
Well, you look back at your code or your writing the next day and go, what on earth was I thinking?
You weren't thinking. That's the point. You were coping. You were just bailing water out of a sinking ship. So if we pause here for a second, the first pillar of the novice paradox is purely structural. It's not that you lack talent. It's that you lack schemas. You are trying to process 1,000 interacting variables with a biological processor that can only handle 4.
And until you build those schemas, which takes time and repetition, you are cognitively bottlenecked. You are trying to run modern, complex software on a pocket calculator.
Which is incredibly frustrating. It shatters our ego because we are used to functioning as highly competent adults in other areas of our lives. But there is another layer to this, because it's not just that the work is structurally hard, it's that the failure actually hurts. And I don't just mean it hurts my pride. I mean, it hurts my mood. It ruins my whole afternoon.
Yeah, now we are moving from the architecture of memory into the neurochemistry of motivation. We have to talk about dopamine.
Everyone loves dopamine. It's the sex, drugs, and rock and roll molecule.
It is the most misunderstood molecule in history. Pop culture thinks dopamine is all about pleasure. Like, I ate the chocolate, I got the dopamine hit, I feel good.
That's not how it works.
Not really. The deep research from Belaine Daw and O'Doherty, who run some of the most sophisticated labs in the world on decision-making and value learning, shows that dopamine is much more about prediction and wanting than it is about liking.
Prediction. Unpack that.
Your brain is fundamentally a prediction engine. It is constantly running a subconscious simulation of the next 5 seconds of your life. If I reach for this coffee cup, I predict I will feel the smooth ceramic. If I press this piano key, I predict I will hear a C sharp.
Okay, that makes sense.
When you are an expert, your predictions are boringly accurate. You press the key, you hear the note, everything matches the simulation. But when you are a novice,
Your predictions are absolute trash.
they are constantly wrong. You reach for the cup and knock it over. You press the key and it buzzes. You try to conjugate the verb and the native speaker just stares at you confused.
So your internal simulation is constantly clashing with reality.
And this clash triggers a specific neural event called a reward prediction error, or RPE. This is the actual currency of learning. If you do something and it works out better than expected surprise, you get a spike of dopamine. That spike says, hey, new positive pattern detected. Do that again.
That's the aha moment. That feels great.
Yes. But the novice experience is defined by the exact opposite. Negative prediction error. You expect to play the song well. You play it terribly. The outcome is significantly worse than the prediction.
And what does the dopamine do in that case?
It crashes. The dopamine neurons in the midbrain, specifically in an area called the ventral tegmental area, or VTA, actually pause their firing. They go silent.
A dopamine drought.
A dip way below your baseline. And subjectively, that does not feel like neutral. That feels like a punishment. It feels like a sudden, sickening drop in your stomach. It feels like lethargy. It feels like this overwhelming thought of, I want to stop doing this immediately and go lie down.
So when I'm sitting there with my guitar and I keep flubbing the F chord and I suddenly feel this intense wave of, I hate this, I'm going to go watch TV, that isn't me being lazy. That is a literal chemical withdrawal symptom.
It is your brain chemically signaling an error. It's saying, this behavior is not yielding resources, it is wasting energy. Cease activity right now.
That is brutal. It's like the brain is actively sabotaging the learning process to save energy.
Oh, it gets worse. Because while your midbrain is pulling the plug on your motivation, another part of your brain is literally screaming at you. The anterior cingulate cortex, or ACC.
The ACC, what is its job in all this?
The ACC is your brain's alarm system. It monitors for conflict. It is constantly comparing your goal versus your actual performance. For a beginner, that gap between what you want to do and what you actually doing is enormous. So the ACC is lighting up like a Christmas tree.
And does ACC activation feel good? I'm guessing no.
No. High ACC activation is directly correlated with the subjective feeling of mental effort, strain, and deep frustration. When people say thinking this hard hurts, they are often describing high, sustained activation in the ACC.
So let's combine these layers. My working memory is completely overwhelmed thanks to cognitive load theory. My dopamine is crashing into the basement because of negative prediction errors, and my ACC is blaring a high decibel alarm because I am failing to meet my goals.
Welcome to the novice paradox. You are fighting a multi-front biological war against your own nervous system.
It's a miracle anyone learns anything ever.
It really is. It takes immense emotional regulation to push through that.
But this leads to a really important distinction the sources make, because obviously people do become experts, we do push through. How? They transition from one system of thinking to another. Boleyn and Daw talk about goal-directed versus habitual systems.
This is critical for understanding habit formation. We often think of habits casually as bad things, like biting your nails or scrolling on your phone. But in neuroscience, forming a habit is the ultimate goal of learning.
Explain that. Why is a habit the goal?
You basically have two systems for doing things. System one is goal-directed. It lives up in the prefrontal cortex and the dorsomedial striatum. It is smart, it is highly flexible, and it is conscious. It's the system you use when you are navigating a brand new city in a rental car.
You're thinking, I need to turn left here, look for the street sign, watch out for those pedestrians. It's very intentional.
Exactly. It's very effective, but it is metabolically expensive. It burns a massive amount of energy, specifically glucose, and it is slow. Beginners are entirely stuck in this system. You have to consciously think about every single finger placement on the guitar fretboard.
And system two.
That's the habitual system. This lives deeper down in the sensorimotor cortices and the dorsolateral striatum. This system is dumb, it's fast, and it's incredibly cheap to run.
Dumb. How is an expert system dumb?
It's dumb in the sense that it doesn't actually know what the overarching goal is. It just responds automatically to a trigger. You see a red light, your foot hits the brake. You don't consciously think, I must stop this vehicle to avoid a fatal collision. You just do it.
It's pure autopilot.
It's pure efficiency. Experts operate almost entirely in the habitual system. A grandmaster isn't consciously thinking about the mechanics of the chess move. Their hand just fluidly moves to the piece while they think about the long game.
So the sheer misery of the beginner phase is that you are forced to use the expensive, high-energy, slow machinery.
Desperately trying to earn the right to use the cheap, fast machinery.
Yeah.
And the only bridge between them is repetition. Thousands and thousands of repetitions.
Which brings us to the existential side of this, because we've talked about the brain mechanics and the memory bottlenecks. But we have to talk about the soul mechanics. We have to talk about the gap.
Ah, yes. Hourglass.
This is probably the most shared piece of advice on the internet for creatives, but we really need to break it down in this specific context. Ira Glass talks about the taste-skill discrepancy.
Right, and his argument brilliantly answers the question, why is it so deeply painful to be bad at something you care about?
Because nobody starts learning to write poetry because they want to write bad poetry.
Exactly. You start because you read Mary Oliver or you read Shakespeare and you felt something profound. You have taste. You have the developed ability to distinguish quality.
Your taste is the whole reason you got into the game.
But that taste is a cruel, double-edged sword. Because when you start, you have the refined taste of a connoisseur, but you have the mechanical skills of a toddler.
And that mismatch is pure torture for the ego.
It's the curse of the connoisseur. If you had bad taste, you wouldn't even know your work sucked. You'd be blissfully ignorant. You'd write your terrible poem and genuinely think, I am a misunderstood genius.
Huh, we all know that person.
We do.
Yeah.
And in a way, they are happier in the short term, but because you have high standards, you are the single most qualified judge of your own incompetence. You look at what you just made, and your flawless taste tells you this is absolute garbage.
Ira Glass says the gap means you're on the right path. But in the moment, it feels like you're broken. It feels like the universe giving you a sign that you should just quit.
The sources had a really interesting tech spin on this, specifically regarding generative AI.
Yeah, I saw that. The article asking, is taste a skill?
Right. The argument is that in a world where AI can instantly generate the code or write the copy or create the image, the skill floor is raising dramatically. But the taste gap is becoming even more relevant.
Because if you can't tell the difference between a generic, boring AI output and a truly great one not played,
you have absolutely no value in the marketplace. So that immense pain you feel when looking at your bad work, that is actually your most valuable asset. It is your quality control mechanism functioning correctly.
I love that reframing. Your self-hatred is actually empirical proof of your potential.
In a dark way, yes. It confirms that your destination is valid, even if your current location is terrible.
Okay, so we've covered the internal struggle, the brain, the chemicals, the taste gap. But we don't learn in a vacuum. We learn in a world full of other people. And according to our sources, that might be the scariest part of all. Let's talk about the spotlight effect.
This is one of the most robust, well-documented findings in social psychology. The spotlight effect is the cognitive bias, where we dramatically overestimate how much other people are noticing us.
There is a classic study mentioned in the research about T-shirts. I love this one because it is just so incredibly awkward to even think about.
This is the legendary Barry Manilow T-shirt study. So researchers asked university students to put on a bright yellow T-shirt featuring a massive image of Barry Manilow.
Which, to be clear, at the time of the study, was considered the absolute height of uncool for a college student.
Extremely uncool. Social suicide. They sent these poor students into a room full of their peers who were just quietly filling out questionnaires. They had them walk in, sit down for a moment, and then leave.
A literal nightmare scenario for a self-conscious young adult.
Truly. Afterward, they pulled the students aside and asked them, how many people in that room do you think noticed your shirt? The students confidently predicted that about 50% of the room would definitely notice.
They felt like a walking neon sign.
But when the researchers actually asked the people in the room, less than 25% even registered the shirt.
That is a huge gap. Half versus a quarter. We are basically hallucinating half of our audience.
And it happens because of a cognitive mechanism called anchoring and adjustment, which is rooted in egocentrism. Not egocentrism in the sense of being arrogant, but in the purely literal sense that we are the center of our own universe. We are the anchor for our own reality.
We are acutely, painfully aware of our own anxiety, our own outfit, our own mistakes.
So we automatically assume everyone else is just as aware of us as we are. We project our hypervigilant internal state onto them.
We really do think we are the main character in everyone else's movie.
Exactly. But the liberating truth is, everyone else is the main character in their own movie. They aren't looking at your T-shirt. They are worrying about their own T-shirt. They are stressing about the text message they just sent or what they're going to eat for lunch.
There's a related concept here called the illusion of transparency.
Yes. This is the false belief that our internal emotional state is leaking out for everyone to see. If you're a beginner giving a presentation, you feel your heart racing, your chest is tight, your hands are shaking, you think, everyone can see I'm terrified.
They all know I'm a fraud.
But usually they can't see it at all. We vastly overestimate the physical visibility of our emotions. We think we are made of glass, but to the outside world, we are actually quite opaque.
Now, the sources brought up a really vital nuance here. The spotlight effect isn't felt equally by everyone across the board.
No, it's not. There is something documented called the minority spotlight effect. The research shows that individuals from underrepresented groups, whether that's LGBTQ+ students, first-generation college students, or racial minorities in STEM fields, experience a severely heightened form of this.
Because in some ways, the spotlight actually is real for them.
Exactly. If you are the only woman in a dense coding boot camp or the only person of color in a graduate seminar, you are statistically more likely to be noticed. This adds a layer of genuine objective social pressure right on top of the cognitive bias.
And what does that do to the brain's ability to learn?
It leads to chronic over-editing behavior. You constantly monitor what you say or do to avoid confirming negative stereotypes. And bringing it all the way back to part one, this dramatically increases extraneous cognitive load.
Right. If I am using my precious 4 slots of working memory to monitor my social standing and protect my identity, I have significantly less memory available to actually learn Python.
Precisely. It creates this vicious, exhausting cycle where social anxiety actually hampers intellectual performance, which then creates more anxiety.
We also have to touch on the sociological angle here. One of the sources, the paper titled The Novice Paradox, a multidisciplinary investigation, mentions neoliberalism and the stigma of the amateur.
This is the idea that in our hyper-capitalist current society, human value is entirely tied to efficiency and marketability. We don't just do things for fun anymore. Everything has to be a side hustle or a strategic career move.
Right. You can't just bake bread on the weekends. You have to start an artisanal bakery Instagram. You can't just run for your health. You have to train for an ultra marathon and post your times.
Exactly. This cultural shift completely devalues the state of being an amateur, which, by the way, comes from the Latin word amator, meaning lover of. Doing something simply because you love it. Because we're so hyper-focused on professionalization, being a beginner feels like a massive drop in social status.
It feels embarrassing to be bad at something because we feel we should always be optimizing our time for profit or prestige.
Yes. We desperately want to skip the suck phase and go straight to the expert phase so we can update our LinkedIn profile. We fear being a beginner because we associate it with being low value.
This leads us directly into the dark side of looking at others. Social comparison. We've all done it. You open Instagram, you see someone doing exactly what you want to do, but they're 10 times better, and you just want to throw your phone in a river.
It's the thief of joy, as the old saying goes. But the research from the paper, The Hidden Power of Social Comparison, adds some really necessary nuance here. It breaks down the different types of comparison.
Upward and downward.
Right. Upward comparison is comparing yourself to someone better or more successful than you. Downward is comparing yourself to someone worse off.
And we naturally assume upward is always bad
Right.
because it makes us feel incredibly small.
Not always. And this is the key. Upward comparison can cause two totally different types of envy. One is malicious envy. This is contrastive. It's the feeling of, they have it, I don't, I resent them, and I want them to fail.
That's the bitter feeling. That's what leads to avoidance. You quit your hobby because you feel you can never compete with them.
But the other side of the coin is benign envy. This is assimilative. You see someone succeeding and you think, they have it, which proves it's possible for me too. It triggers approach motivation. It actually fuels your fire.
So what dictates which one you feel? Why do I sometimes look at a great podcaster and feel inspired and other times feel like total garbage?
The research suggests it heavily comes down to secure self-esteem. If you feel generally secure in your baseline worth as a human being, you're much more likely to feel benign envy. If your self-esteem is currently fragile, the comparison feels like an existential threat to your identity, which triggers malicious envy.
There was a brutal story in the source material about the author Nir Eyal that perfectly illustrates this.
Oh, the WhatsApp story?
Yeah.
Yes. So this author had just sold 500,000 copies of his book, a massive, undeniable success by any metric. He should be on top of the world.
500,000 copies is a dream. That is a career-making number in publishing.
But on the exact same day he gets that news, he reads an article that the founders of WhatsApp just sold their company to Facebook for $19 billion. And suddenly, he feels like an absolute failure. He spirals. He thinks, why didn't I build a messaging app? Why did I waste my time just writing this book?
That is the ultimate example of the contrast effect. It completely blinds you to your own progress because the anchor point you chose is so astronomically high.
And social media amplifies this contrast exponentially. We compare our messy insides to everyone else's curated outsides. We see their polished, finished product, but we feel our own painful, confusing process. It is a fundamentally unfair comparison.
Okay, so we have thoroughly diagnosed the problem. The novice paradox is a multi-headed monster. It is a cognitive bottleneck, it is a dopamine deprivation tank, it is a taste skill gap, and it is a social anxiety nightmare.
It is a formidable set of barriers. It is biologically and psychologically expensive to be a beginner.
But knowing that the resistance isn't a lack of your personal talent, but a universal biological experience that changes the game. So let's pivot to the strategies. How do we hack this? How do we actually get through the paradox and build consistency?
The first major strategy comes right back to cognitive load theory. If the core problem is overload, the solution is scaffolding.
Guided autonomy.
Right. Do not just jump into the deep end. That is a recipe for drowning and quitting. You need to artificially reduce the intrinsic load before you attempt the task.
Give us a practical example of how to do that.
Pre-training. Let's say you want to learn to use complex video editing software like Premiere Pro. Don't just open the program and start randomly clicking. That instantly floods your working memory. Instead, watch a 20-minute overview video first. Just watch it. Read a basic summary of the interface.
Why does that help if you aren't actually doing it yet?
Because you are building a rudimentary schema. You're building a mental map. It's like building a coat rack to hang the new information on. So when you finally open the software, you aren't seeing 100 random terrifying buttons. You're saying, oh, that's the audio section and that's the video timeline. You drastically reduce the element interactivity.
So you're basically priming your working memory to not panic.
Exactly. You are artificially lowering the difficulty setting until your brain catches up.
Another tool mentioned in the papers was satisficing. We talked about it as a panic response earlier, but can we actually use it intentionally?
Yes. You can and should weaponize satisficing. Give yourself explicit permission to do a bad job on the non-essential parts of a task.
Explain how that looks in practice.
If you're learning to cook a complex new recipe, maybe buy the pre-chopped vegetables. Satisfice the prep work. Tell yourself, I don't care about my knife skills today. I'm going to save my limited working memory to focus entirely on the actual cooking technique and temperature control. Don't try to be perfect at every element simultaneously. Conserve your cognitive credits.
I really like that. It's strategic laziness for the sake of learning. What about the spotlight effect? How do we turn off that invisible judging audience in our heads?
There are two great reality checks here. First, the 1 week rule. When you make a mistake as a beginner, you trip, you ask a dumb question, you play the wrong note. Ask yourself, who will remember this in a week?
And the answer is almost always literally no one.
Exactly. Everyone else is too busy starring in their own movie. And the second tool is conscious reality testing. Remind yourself of the Barry Manilow t-shirt study. When you feel that intense heat of the spotlight, verbally tell yourself, I am just an extra in their movie. They are not watching me.
It's surprisingly liberating to realize you just aren't that important to strangers.
It really is. It gives you the psychological freedom to be bad.
Now, what about the taste gap? How do we actually close it?
Ira Glass gives us the only answer that mathematically works: volume.
Do a huge volume of work.
You cannot think your way across the gap. You cannot theory craft your way to being good. You have to build the bridge with a massive pile of bad work. You have to force yourself to finish projects even when your exquisite taste is screaming that they aren't good.
Because you just need the reps.
You need the reps to build the schemas we talked about in part 1. You need the reps to force the transition from the exhausting goal-directed system to the efficient habitual system we talked about in part 2. The only way out is through.
And finding a community helps with that volume, right?
Crucially, if you surround yourself with other beginners, you get lateral comparison instead of upward comparison. You see others struggling with the exact same mundane things. It normalizes the failure. It makes the dopamine dip feel like a shared tribal experience rather than a personal defect.
Speaking of dopamine, is there a neuroscience hack for that? Can we trick the prediction engine when it crashes?
You can actively reframe the signal. When you feel that deep frustration, that dopamine dip, that sickening drop in your stomach, instead of interpreting it as, I am failing and I should quit, interpret it as calibration.
Calibration.
Yes. That terrible feeling is literally your brain updating its predictive software. It is raw data processing. If you didn't feel that dip, you wouldn't be learning anything new. If you can cognitively reframe the pain of error as the physical sensation of neuroplasticity happening in real time, it becomes so much easier to bear.
That is powerful. Telling yourself, this hurts right now because I am actively getting smarter.
Exactly. That frustration is the literal sound of your neural networks rewiring themselves. Lean into it. It's a growth mindset applied at the neurochemical level.
So let's bring this all home. The novice paradox is real.
Yeah.
Your brain deeply hates being a beginner. It limits your memory, it withdraws your happy chemicals, and it tricks you into thinking everyone is laughing at you.
It is a biological default designed to keep us safe and efficient. The ancient brain wants to keep you in the habitual zone, where energy costs are low and risks to your social standing are minimal.
But knowing that the resistance isn't a lack of your character or talent, but just a universal biological hurdle that changes the game entirely.
It means the struggle isn't a stop sign. It's just the toll you pay for entry into a new skill.
I want to leave you with a thought from the synthesis of all our sources today. We live in a world that is obsessed with instant results, with life hacks, with optimized efficiency. We are terrified of looking like amateurs.
But in a world like that, choosing to be a beginner, consciously choosing to be slow, vulnerable, and bad at something is actually a radical act. It is a profound act of resistance against that culture.
It is the only way to expand who you are. If you only ever do what you're already good at, you are completely stagnant. Being a beginner is the only path to becoming something new. Think about this. What if the areas where you are currently the most incompetent are the only places left where you are actually exercising free will?
Oh, I love that. So go close the gap.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Go fail at something today. We'll see you next time.